Hey, what's up? So welcome. Yes, today we're talking about pop style, contemporary vocals. It's a really interesting genre actually to talk about, and I think it can be confusing to sort of know how to make it feel authentic. So I'm going to talk about just a little bit of what I think the genre is, and then from there we can kind of work on some specific stylizations. But I think explaining sort of the framework first is going to be helpful. I think when you do sort of a pop or contemporary sound and it's kind of sounds forced, that can be kind of off-putting. And so, I think what's tricky about this style is it's kind of an ever-changing goalpost. It's like what's accessible, what's fresh, what's new. There are particular things that we can do vocally that we hear a lot of the time, but the second you start like reproducing a certain sound, that's like this is what pop vocals are, you might be getting stuck in the past a little bit too, and so that's why it's an ever-changing goalpost. And I think the most important thing to sort of think about is pop music is really in reaction to what sounds old or has been done already. And so that lends itself to this difficulty of naming a genre that's forever kind of adapting and evolving. I mean, it's funny, like you look at like the origins of pop was in like the 1950s, and it's like that does not feel like pop music now, right? Contemporary, but it was at that point. And then, like you could think of like flash forward to like the 90s, right? When we had a lot of sort of pop music happening, and that's kind of what I sort of think of. But then again, it's like I grew up in the 90s. So uh, that's, this ever changing goalpost. The way we want to kind of think about it is when we too specifically sound like a old genre, then we move away from pop vocals. So that's the first thing to kind of think about is like learning and understanding other genres can help you define what pop music is going to sound like. And I think what's cool is like, yes, we have like the commercial realm of pop, which is like the sound that's like accessible and current right now, but that's still kind of like capturing what artists are doing to kind of forever push that goalpost a little bit farther. And it's usually in reaction also to like the technology that we have. So if you think about like when we talked about choral music, singing in these big cathedral like halls is where this kind of came from and evolved as a style. And then you think about musical theater and you're like, okay, that's like on the stage. It's a very particular kind of energy and vocalization that happens. You can almost think of it as like what happens when you're doing like stage acting compared to like film acting, right? It's like stage acting is really big. It's in, you're showing a lot, but when you do that like on sort of film, sort of the on TV screen kind of a vibe, it's like overdone and it looks like soap opera kind of a vibe. Whereas like the smallest little like change of your eyebrow and stuff, like when with the technology and like modern film, uh, that's going to be more of that type of acting, and it's a different thing. So with this analogy, you can think of like pop vocals because we're often using a microphone or we're recording tracks, we're working with electronic music. Our voice kind of evolves with the sounds that are around us. So I always think about like being able to explore the flexibility with your voice and style is actually going to help you with contemporary pop vocals. Where when I see people like kind of doing pop vocals not so well, it's because they're so stuck in a particular practice, like singing classical, that their like default is always to go to that very even vibrato. And it just like, the back of your head, you're like, that's a classical singer, or like that very particular musical theater sound where it's very over characterized, that sometimes there's crossover obviously in pop music, but then it's like, oh, that person probably did a lot of musical theater. They look like they're like a character on a stage. You get pop musicians who have musical theater background, right, and move into more specific pop vocals. It's a very interesting thing that happens. But really, what we're seeing is that like pop music in general is about how you find an authentic sound. So, sometimes we have these sort of like how to find your authentic sound videos and content. So, there's a lot of exploration that's involved. There's some sort of influence from other artists and listening and singing to other artists. But if you're just imitating that artist, again, you're kind of stuck in that sort of sense of the past, like imitating something. And then you might run into this sort of problem where it's like, I'm really good at singing like doo-wop music because back in the day, doo-wop music was my pop music. And it's like now that sounds dated because it's a very particular kind of a sound. The same thing is true for us, like as like I'm a millennial, and so like when I think of like singing pop music from the '90s and that kind of thing, there's a sense of it being a little bit dated as well. So this is where we get to this interesting aspect of like what defines pop music. First of all, it's for the masses, it's accessibility, it's what people are interested in. So there's a little bit of like yes, so surveying like what people are doing, using some influence and things like that. But really, it's like exploring how to use your voice expressively. But think of it like smaller actually than a lot of the other forms. I think when we over exaggerate things, that's sometimes where it seems like a little less authentic. Um, so think of like there are a couple vocal styles that I can immediately kind of think of that really start to help you find a pop sound. The first thing is thinking about breathiness of tone. And when you're involving breathiness of tone, it doesn't have to be throughout the entire song, but sometimes there's vocal fry. So these are all things that, like in the classical realm or in choral music and things like that, the older sort of you go back, those were things that were discouraged. So you can think like pop music is in some ways a reaction to what sounds old, right? So that's again why I'm kind of using that as a framework to think about. Whereas you could, if you think like too much like, if I just add these elements, then I'm going to sound like a pop musician. And that might be the wrong way of going about it. So the first thing is getting comfortable with being able to sing breathy tone. What's hard about all of this too is like when you're exploring all these styles, um, as a pop musician, you're more likely to get kind of twisted up in a knot trying to explore how to sing because we want it to be accessible. We're experimenting with lots of things, but we maybe don't have like a stable practice. So that's why I recommend actually all really good pop singers are people who can actually sing other genres and are making more specific choices and have that flexibility in their voice versus just like a young singer who's singing of the times, like what they're hearing. I think again, like a pop singer is someone who's pushing that needle a little bit or pushing the goalpost and making something that's like authentically their own music. So it's not just about the vocals; it's also about like how you're applying them. And then there's this one last element before we get into some vocal stuff. Um, you like think of it like nowadays we have so much genre crossover that like you don't have to think of it like I'm going to completely avoid old styles. It's more just like how do you make them fresh? How do you include them into your sort of overall influence? So what's kind of tricky is like we're often genre splicing and we're all so like there's like pop country, there's pop R&B, there's like more contemporary classical, there's like you could pop jazz kind of styles. So it really just kind of creeps its way into every other genre. So again, musical theater, right? Like that's as we talked about last time, like with musical theater, it's an ever evolving style that uses pop music, but it's always through telling a story and character development. And so it's like kind of the platform that changes a lot of maybe some of the things that happen and the kind of singer that you are going to be. Because like a musical theater singer is going to be singing many, many hours in a show, doing back to back rehearsals. A pop singer is going to be a little bit of a different thing. I'm not saying that pop singers don't like have grueling tour schedules and things like that, but it's just a different approach in a lot of ways. Um, so let's get to like what we can do to make our voice sound just like a little more effortless, a little more accessible. So when we get too pure of a sound, sometimes all the way through in our voice, too much even vibrato, those kinds of things, it's going to make it kind of feel a little less pop. And if we're singing notes like too precise and over enunciating things, those are the things that like might work for musical theater and for classical music, but they're going to backfire a little bit in pop music because we want it to be colloquial. We want it to sound just like we're talking to a certain degree. So the first thing is like finding breathiness and vocal fry. For those of you who are with me, what do you think about, or do you is this something that you do as a singer, or are you guys beginners? Like just like to get a sense of like who I have here. because I have some things that I think can be tricky when you're trying to add breathiness. Like it can backfire. So there's some good sort of techniques that we can work on. Um, do you struggle with vocal fry? Like, how do you find that? Those are some of the things, and it's one thing just to like have vocal fry and breathiness in your voice when you're talking. It's another thing to add it when you're singing pitches. So I'll just go through some things, but like again, I want to hear from people who are here. Like, what do you struggle with? Do you have issues sounding authentic as a pop vocalist, or do you have like technique sort of tension points that come around when you try to sing pop music? These are the things that I kind of want to talk about, or just ways that you find your voice sounds more unique, or perhaps like things that you strategize in terms of changing from one genre to the next, or if that's something that you even think about when you're singing, right? So, like, as someone who sings a lot of genres, I sometimes have to consciously make a shift. Like, so even in like choral music, there's pop choral music, covering a pop song, which is just ensemble music, doing a pop song in harmonies versus like more traditional kind of classical sounds. Um, like oftentimes I'm kind of thinking to myself when I'm looking at a piece, like, what kind of tool am I going to bring to this particular project with my voice and kind of warm it up that way. So when we talk about vocal fry, the reason I kind of think this is a really good place to start is because it's really just like the most relaxed breath support that you can do. And it's really good also for relaxing your larynx and your vocal folds. If you're really tight, you're going to have trouble doing vocal fry. So really, when you think about it, is like your vocal folds are letting air bubbles escape, and it creates that kind of gravelly sort of a sound. So you can do it by imitation. You can do it just by thinking about singing really towards the very bottom of your voice, and then kind of letting it turn into more air. So I'm going to do it for a sec just to kind of get it going. And I find that it's helpful to move through vowel shapes to get it more consistent and controllable. So this is something that you'll find in some pop vocalists. Obviously, it's something that you want to coax into your voice, but when you try to like force it to happen, it can sound a little less authentic. This is why this is even like a tricky thing to teach, over camera, things like that, because a lot of these choices come in the moment, and they're a little bit like the energy of the sound. So vocal fry again is a very relaxed place. So I try to keep my throat really kind of loose, my jaw loose, and then I'm gonna go like, yeah, hey, and this is actually a good way to kind of find where the bottom of your range is. Like, it's kind of where it sort of stalls out into neutral. And then the next thing is I often find it's easy to get some vocal fry in any of the glides that we have. So like, why, yeah, hey, just like, so sometimes again, like when we're doing pop music, we sometimes like overemphasize diphthongs actually in a certain way. um we keep the everything else pretty loose, but I might be like, hey, why, just and so that there's this feeling of starting from a very relaxed place, and then going to wherever my pitch is. So you can almost think of it as like you're going from the bottom to your note. And that's very much this sort of carefree kind of accessible thing. So like, hey, hey, like if I like, I might come up with little like phrases a lot of the times when I do this rather than like distinct exercises, because I've done that before, but it sometimes just feels a little too formulaic for this particular kind of vibe. So sometimes what I'll do is um, I'll take a phrase like I'm not okay or something like that, and be like, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. Um, I'm not okay. Uh, I'm not okay. And I try to find that little moment of just for a while. Just. What's hard is sometimes being relaxed enough to kind of make that happen. And again, like a lot of pop music is like very close mic sort of connection. So this is stuff that you do like right up into the mic. I'm just for a while. So you don't actually have to overforce it. So again, sometimes I think other singers will overdo a lot of pop things actually in certain moments. This is more again the relaxed sort of side of the voice. Um, so again, we're trying to find vocal fry. You can kind of slide around with it too if you're going like sometimes it feels too static if you're just on a single sort of spot. So I kind of slide around and then try to settle back into it and be like, "Eh, we- eh, I, and practice kind of coming on and off of it. So that's a way you can kind of like coax it into your sound. And then again, sometimes when you have particular sort of diphthong moments or starts of sound, you can kind of get some of that in there by just thinking about starting from very, very relaxed breath. The thing that adds to this is that concept of breathiness. Um, this can really mess up people who are trying to imitate the sound but haven't worked with like voice training or anything like that. The thing here is like if you're trying to push air out to make breathiness, one, you're going to get very, very lightheaded, and two, it's kind of irritating on the voice. And then you're probably going to also sing kind of flat. So the thing that we want to think about is breathiness is actually um, not pushing, but a release, a slow release of air, and we want it to be pretty even. So a thing that I'll practice is this sort of like fogging a mirror concept. So it's like a in HA, like a ha. So H, like basically the H sound is what we use for breathiness. But again, you don't want to be like while you're singing, like kind of like pushing it out. But instead, think of it like again, like you're fogging a mirror. So it's like warm air that's coming out. So I'm going like you can kind of feel for it, so you can get a sense of what that's like. Sometimes people use like a candle, for example, right? I don't know if you'll see that again. Like if you're following like vocal stuff, you'll get flooded with all of these like try this and like look at how my jaw opens. I mean, like kind of things like that. Again, it can be a little overwhelming. Um, but and a little gimmicky. I totally understand sort of the commercial nature of it. So just kind of being real about it, it's like exploring and playing around with some of these sound shapes, trying to get that feeling and sensation of when you're just letting out like a nice even stream of air that's very warm is kind of the trick. So again, it's like you're fogging a mirror. You can even try to fog a mirror and go like the trick here is to try to do it really evenly, like you're gonna do like a long sentence or a really big image, and you're trying to fog a lot of space. So I'm, rather than just like a puff of air, I'm like, and I'm trying to save that feeling. So when I have a note and I'm like, ah, ah, hey, I want to try to balance how much tone is happening. So again, like full tone, like I've got that resonance, it's more clean, and then I'm trying to sort of balance how much that's happening. It works well with vocal fry because again, we have a very relaxed. Our vocal folds are really relaxed to let air bubbles out when we do vocal fry. So finding that is even like a primitive kind of thing, like imitating, like the creaking of a door, or like there's some classic sort of sounds that kind of have that sort of bubbly thing. Imitating that can help you get the loose chord compression that we need for this. Um, what's tricky again is we don't want to blow air out because that's going to be not, it's going to essentially make our vocal folds less stable. And then we might squeeze, especially as we go higher. So we'll talk about that in a second. But again, really what you're practicing is like, how much air can I put on while still preserving my tone? And you can practice this like low to middle parts of your range. So I might start just with the fogging the mirror sound. And this is really going to teach you a lot about the onset of your voice. So if I'm like, and then I start singing on to like a few seconds later. So if I'm like, ah, ah, hey, and then I might try to put them together. So I might be like, mm, ah, So really the trick here is it's about what's happening with your breath support. So you want to save the feeling of how much effort is there. You'll feel something, it's subtle, but my body does stay somewhat stable. It's not collapsing too fast and it's not pressing out a lot like really high intensity breath support. So it's somewhere in the balance there. And you might put your hands like here just to feel it on your belly. Ah, hey. And you'll get that kind of white noise sound. And then we try to slide with that. So like, hey. You'll notice as you go up, it's going to disappear a little bit. The way that we find it as we go up higher is actually thinking a little bit of our head voice influence. So I'd recommend, like for any pop vocalists, like really find your head voice and then practice bringing it down. This is that light mix kind of a concept. So like, if I was like, "Ee, ee." So once I'm in my chest voice, ha, I can feel a little bit of like I could always go back up to head voice. It's a way you can check it. Like if I have a tone here and I'm feeling more chest voice, like and it's hard for me to get into head voice, like like I'm cracking. Um, that's a sign maybe that you're a little bit too much pressure. We can play with that later, like as we learn to kind of purposefully crack, which is another thing that happens in a lot of pop music. But to just feel out how easily you can go up into your head voice, like ah, hey, hey. So what happens is if I was like baby for a while, hey, I can always kind of keep that sort of like stable, light tone even as I go up into my higher register, like just for a while. So that's that kind of concept, right? It's a very light, effortless singing. Again, it's going to work really well into a mic. If I was like, you're like, just for a while, like obviously very classical, right? I went into a kind of a default. In some ways, it might be easier and less sort of risky because, like, I know if I just put a certain amount of breath support on, I have vibrato happening, it's going to clean up a lot of issues. But if I'm like, just for a while. So what you'll notice is a lot of pop singers, because they're in this kind of tone, another thing that happens a lot that also is very accessible is thinking about like scoops and falls. This is another way of, in this concept of making something your own and sort of pushing the goalpost. Scooping up into a note is kind of one, like a way that you can test out a spot before you actually fully sing into it, and it allows you to like not over sing it. So if I was like and let's say I didn't get quite there yet and I was like just for a while, right? Same thing with vocal fry. I could be like just for a while, like all of a sudden like I just scooping up into the note can actually help me manage just like how much pressure and make sure that I'm not overdoing it. And this is like the lighter part of a pop song. Often a lot of pop songs will switch back and forth. Like you'll have like very light, carefree, and then you'll get more of that sort of like more intense kind of climax. Um, yes, no, exactly. This is kind of the idea. Is it's like, and there's that's kind of like with musical theater. There's this concept of the talk singing thing that definitely comes into play, or like talking in microtones, which comes from like some of these other styles too, right? It's sort of like a genre blending kind of a thing. And then articulating words differently. You're totally right. So like one thing that I talk about a lot is like, at least for a while, like sometimes people will play with, strangely enough, the kind of like, it's kind of like how you would talk to like a baby almost, but you're going like, you're kind of putting in diphthongs where they don't normally exist. So like just is a really good word. Like you could be like just for a while. This happens, in certain singers, you'll kind of hear it. But really what I'm doing is I'm going like, oi, just for a while. You don't know. And it'll kind of put you in this sort of place that sometimes, again, will kind of have a particular sort of sound. So it's again, it's like a really interesting thing. You want to be careful about over enunciating, as like what you were saying. Like, anytime the classic one that we'll sort of say is anytime you go like running, playing, and you kind of overdo it, that sometimes can pull you out of the style. But again, sometimes I hear exceptions to these rules. It's really more the concept of like if you're trying to really over enunciate, like you might in a musical theater thing, you might you might sound a little bit more musical theater versus like just keeping it a little floppier, like running down the way, running, singing all, you see what I mean? Like singing all the time. Hey. So again, we're trying to make sure that we make it sound more colloquial. You can use slang, things like that, obviously, play into it too. Um, so again, I think like the default for a lot of good pop music is actually finding this kind of like light mix kind of breathiness with vocal fry. This might be particular to like certain kinds of singers again. So it's not like, this is why I sort of started. If you just showed up, like talking about pop is this ever changing sort of goalpost. So it's really like if you're over practicing specific stylizations, it can sound kind of like inauthentic. And really what we're trying to do is just make something that's in a reaction to what we kind of think of as old, what we think of as already been done. So trying to imitate too much can be a problem. Really, what we want to do is explore how we can sing in just a very kind of carefree, sort of relaxed way that feels accessible. So I encourage finding that. The other reason finding good breathy tone, light mix, and vocal fry is helpful is in a lot of pop music when we go the other direction. Think we can get kind of twisted up in a knot sometimes. Sometimes by trying to like force air out, by certain tension points as we try to get like the brightness, and because we're going from so relaxed to a really kind of more involved kind of singing a lot of the time. That's where people are sort of caught blindsided, and then they do the wrong thing. They like lift or squeeze, and that's we get sort of like immediate harm. It's almost in the contrast. But what we can really think of is this is the way that we can actually decompress. And then we just have to be mindful when we go up into our sort of higher range that we use some breath support. Again, it's not a lot compared to like classical music or what you might feel in choral music or even musical theater. It's actually a lot less because we're usually singing into a microphone. It's a little more imitation. But you'll often get these kind of like repeated phrases. It's sort of like, again, there's this funny analogy of like fresh and new, and we tend to get like more kind of baby or like young kinds of sounds that happen a lot of the time. So there's the kind of like whine thing, and it's again like if I can find my light mix, like let's say I'm up in this kind of range, which is high for me, and I'm like na 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 ah, you see how it's like I can just kind of switch into what sounds more like head voice, but I can start like I'm talking in this range. La, if I can find that placement, then I can be like, you didn't say what you wanted to say every day. That kind of a thing, where I'm just repeating 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. Na 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 na. It's really like the brightness or that concept of like switching the timbre that makes it happen rather than trying to do a lot of force. So again, I might be like I might be singing like "Hey for tonight, take it slow," whatever it is I'm singing, kind of things like that, like ah, hey oh, ah, ah, and then all of a sudden I'm like no, oh, no, 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 no. Again, breath support is not like super intense. It's more just the shift of the overtone, getting a little bit more sort of that twangy kind of a sound. And then we can kind of go back to that very like, if I'm up here, I'm like, ja. You always should be able to come back to that relaxed kind of vocal fry. So you can actually practice this and be like, that way you can kind of like come into it a little bit less sort of like intense, and you're making sure that your breath support is a little bit more like soft. I mean, it's still active, and that's what's kind of hard to sort of teach to people. It's still active, but I'm not like really flexing like super hard when I do that kind of a sound. I'm more playing with where the position of the overtone and resonance is. So down here, like, I'm trying to find that balance. And I might pick certain spots in my voice, like there is kind of low, not super low, but sort of towards the bottom. And then up, like let's say I'm up here, I'll keep it in key, like ah, ah. The overtone's a little different, so I have to play around with like ah, where I can find that kind of breathy tone. And then up here, like ah, ah. If I feel these three different zones, I can feel that my breath support is different at each spot. But I'm really trying to make sure that it's not such an extreme change actually there. And I'm playing more with these sort of subtle changes and then letting a microphone do a lot of the work for me. So that's kind of one of the big tricks with it. But it can tend to leave people singing off their voice or off of their breath support and then really squeezing and straining. So again, you still want this area to be pretty loose and relaxed. It might come up a little bit just because of the smaller instrument kind of a sound sometimes compared to like a really low kind of classical larynx. I don't think you should really push in either direction. Um, but what we're trying to feel out is like, can I go from really effortless, relaxed, like all the way up to uh, uh, um, yeah, that's kind of what I'm sort of talking about. Like singing in a breathy voice is kind of like a style, and it's a very common thing in contemporary music because it's just like a little more carefree. But it also like finding that light mix is going to really help you actually with your sort of belting tone, adding in vocal fry. All of these things are just part of like the energy and attitude of like certain kinds of vocals. The other thing is like, so if we're making things our own, the other like obvious thing that happens in contemporary pop music is our runs and a particular way that we do riffs and runs. So this is where having this loose, relaxed, kind of slightly lighter breath support realm. Again, like they're still active, but it's like, are you using like a Sharpie marker or are you using like a soft pastel? And this is like more pastel. And it's really important to note that a lot of what we hear is more like digitally altered. Like there's auto tune. We want to sing in tune. The less you sing in tune, the more robotic it's going to sound when you put the auto tune on because it has to correct it a lot. But we often get that kind of gloss and some of that sound of the resonance through the mixing and through the auto tuning and stuff like that. So it's just important to note that like what's the actual sound that we bring to it, because if you bring a lot of resonant formant, it can actually backfire as well. It's kind of like the classical thing, right? Again, like when we're doing riffs and runs, we want that sort of loose, relaxed, kind of breathy feeling. And then we add in like little bits of pulsing, scooping, things like that, slides, fall offs, all of these little details really make something sound poppy. So it's kind of like how you're playing with the melody as well. So like singing a song really straight and with perfect, each pitch is exactly where it should be, is going to make it sound more like an older practice, right? And like there's this need for a correctness. So we kind of hide that with pop singers. Don't get me wrong, pop singers are very specific about their pitches if they're going to be like a really good professional singer. Some better than others, again, because you can hide stuff like digitally, like in recording compared to a live performance. Sometimes that messes with people. Sometimes they have a guide track of their own voice playing from the recording and they're singing on top of it, right? That's why we sometimes get the lip syncing thing. There's other technical reasons for why people do that. Again, sometimes people like get really angry about that, which I understand when it's really overdone and the person's falling back on it and just mouthing it. That's not right. But like what happens sometimes is it's also to keep everything coordinated because there's lots of like aspects of the music that like need to happen. Like dancers, things like that, and they're keeping it to a click track so that it's like all um, perfectly staged out, right? Because the big pop productions are like almost like little mini operas nowadays, right? Like you have this sort of flow from one sort of set to another, utilizing like all sorts of different artists at the same time. Um, yeah, yeah. Well, and yeah, I love that you're saying that because a part of like, it goes with my concept again. So like keeping things fresh, keeping them new, keeping people feeling like this is all happening in front of me. This is like an artist expressing themselves without like necessarily um, like rehashing the same thing over and over again. Like a way that we can do that because like realistically, like we can't just keep coming up with infinite songs. Like we keep come up with catchy songs that people can sing along to, but we have to keep sort of shifting it up. So a pop singer is going to be a really good improviser a lot of the time. They're able to add in things that kind of stylize it differently. So like again, a really good contemporary singer is just like a master stylizer. So that's why I say like for if you're a pop singer, work on all the other genres so you can feel that flexibility so that when you're just singing and expressing yourself, you can kind of just like play off of how it's feeling. Um, but another thing is just getting really good at understanding how to add riffs and runs and little scoops and slides to your stuff. So this is where we can kind of break it down a little bit. Like if I've got like a note here, I could just be like, ha, ha, and sing it perfectly into it. Or I could be like, ha, hey, hey, just. So it goes with that whole concept of like scooping, adding some vocal fry, thinking about breathiness, sort of slowly sliding into it. That's also the kind of the beginning of runs, is this feeling of, hey, yeah, oh, kind of sliding into it. It's going to be a helpful way to kind of feel that build of momentum and then the release. Um, so runs are really, really important. They start with this concept of scooping things or pulsing them, like, hey, you're just kind of letting it drop and then re-articulating it. So that's something that, if you're like, my sound just doesn't sound poppy enough, you can kind of just think about, well, where am I adding scoops? Where am I sliding into things a little bit? And then there's also like how we end our notes. So that's kind of like the onset. But there's also this concept of not just like letting it end on the note. And this is part of like how runs also like why they exist too. But like, well, like let's say I'm saying a word like goodbye, and I go like goodbye, goodbye. I let it kind of like hi, fall, kind of like go up to the top note as I'm closing. So it's not again. I'm not like goodbye. That would be too straight. But goodbye. I'm kind of like scooping up to it. And sometimes you'll see some pop singers like really do this, and they're like talking about the song, and they kind of like nah, and they kind of slide up into it, right? That's where you were talking about that kind of like talk singing sometimes is like just changing the inflection of your sound. Um, you know, that happens sometimes. Again, maybe that's also a little dated, right? But that's something that we hear sometimes. But typical thing again is like letting things kind of like move a little bit. Goodbye, hey, that kind of fall down. It's like if I was like just for tonight, night, night, letting it kind of fall to a thing sometimes in a certain context is going to be helpful. So you can keep sort of mixing it up. So then let's talk about like the pop kind of run sort of a thing, because I think this is also really helpful especially if you're someone who works with other styles, and will make sense with why I'm kind of talking about the base of this being that really breathy, hey, why, hey. We don't want this area to squeeze. So we want to make sure it's that kind of fogging the mirror kind of concept. But this is going to get us in a good place to be able to manipulate the larynx a little bit. I know it sounds like, oh no, you can't do that. You don't want to like squeeze or over pressurize the larynx, right? When you're singing really intensely, this is where this can become a problem. But when you're singing in a place that's comfortable and you can find like even your light mix, even in a higher place, right? It's not a lot of pressure because my vocal folds are coming off of they're not as much surface area. They're coming off a little bit and pulling away. that can allow me to start to manipulate the larynx at the same time. So this is where like this is kind of like the pop run. So like we'll talk about like the 5 note run, right? So we're going like da 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 3 2 1 6 5. I sometimes it's nice to sort of start with something else and then drop into it. I'll start first with just 3 notes. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to find that scoop on each one. So first, just make sure you can hit the notes like ah, ah. Find that breathy thing. Ah, you can find vocal fry, which is nearby that breathy feeling. Ah, and then try to scoop each one. So you're gonna be like wah, and then put your hand here. Don't hold it, but just feel the motion here and be like, wah, and play around with it again. Doesn't have to sound perfect. Like, ah, ah, a little bit of that motion. Again, I'm not over forcing it. That's fine on the voice. And then what we try to do is stitch it together and be like, wah, hey, ah. So there's this feeling of like when I get to I'm kind of pulsing that there. Ah, ah, ah. It's similar to the scoop. Again, it's not quite the same thing, but often again with runs is like we lose that the clarity of the note in the middle, and that's when it sounds kind of wrong. So hey, it's actually if you get light enough with your breath support and your chord compression. Hey, you can start to get that. You can also practice staccatos, which can be helpful, like ha 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 ha. And it kind of almost feels like you're just running together those little staccato feelings. So then we might take a note on the top and be like, whoa. And if I just keep adding more scoops, yeah. Now, the thing that's important here is I added more energy on this top note, but then I'm coming back to that same feeling of being able to relax here. Like, so again, you can always just feel out. Can I go all the way to fry and be like, ah, because I always want to come off of this a little bit. So it's just this play of energy. And then let's keep trying to go a little farther. So this one is 5 3 2 1 6 5. Whoa, hey. So you can see if you're looking at my larynx, like, hey. Each one is kind of in a slightly different place. And I'm actually kind of manipulating the larynx, which again, like in classical realm, people are like, don't ever do that. It's going to kill you. As long as you're not like over forcing it, that to me is how we make this sound of the pop run actually. So you'll actually see the whole instrument kind of like doing like that. It's like, imagine like I always give this analogy like you're like running your fingers down like tines of a comb. There's a little buildup of pressure, and then you let it slip to the next spot. So that's what we're kind of feeling for. And so we kind of have to be like just riding the edge of being somewhat off of our voice in order to make it happen. And that's why this can be so hard, especially if you're really amped up and you're trying to sing, you might overdo it and be like, whoa. And then it does that, whoa, right? And that's like the, ooh, that person, that sound didn't happen. It's lighter, right? So, whoa, oh, right? So it takes a little bit of time to like, da 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 da. Find the spots like ha 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 ha. I have to be able to sing kind of in that sort of light place, and then I might scoop all of them and be like, whoa. It's almost like think of it like a pulse too, right? That feeling of going like ah ah, that resetting of the larynx. We let go of the stability and then we have it come back in place. You try it on each note and be like, and as you get super low, more breathy. You can see the little muscles kind of moving, and then be like, whoa, hey, like, let's make some words like, for tonight, night, just for tonight, right? And then I can kind of just like just knock each one off. Again, it's a very subtle kind of playing with the sound. So a lot of the times when we're over engaging, we get kind of stuck and we're not able to do this. And then if we're trying to think so relaxed with our breath, I mean with our throat like we're doing classical music, then it's going to also slide together. It's like we're trying to purposefully break the sound just the tiniest bit in between each note. And that just takes some practice. So again, like fiddle around with this. I always like historically say like try to do this at like the grocery store, like very light under your breath actually. So you feel just that really subtle breath support. Again, if you're having trouble getting up to the pitches, make sure you still feel some breath support. Like you want this feeling of like like I still have it always kind of looks the same, but I'm not flexing very hard. Even if I'm up here, no, 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 whoa, So if I'm like, let's, whoa, yeah, and I can kind of come in and just add a little bit more pressure as I go. Whoa, yeah. And I just kind of play around with them again like that. So you just get really comfortable with these different kinds of licks. So that's kind of what I would say is actually key is finding that and not over singing when you do pop music in general. And then, yes, there's this concept of like, how do we get brightness in our voice? Again, not through force, but we can think about bringing the tongue kind of forward. This is like when I talked about like the sort of baby sounds that people make sometimes where we're like, just for a while, just for a while. It's kind of like the backwards version of going like, nya, 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 nya. I'm bringing my tongue forward a little bit. Nya, 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 nya. And you can get more sort of masky brightness. And it's really the contrast between like going, nya, 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 which can start to sound more whiny, more shouty. Nya, nya, nya. You can add like grit and all these kinds of things, going back to again that like a, na, 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 and then na, kind of being able to switch back up into head voice and back into that sort of area. So again, mixing is like is lighter than people would think. And then, yeah, you can slowly start to try to add more heavy singing on top of it. But actually, you'll find that that'll carry you through a lot of pop music is actually kind of just keeping with the light mix. Yes, Ariana Grande is like a very expert, masterful singer who's often like also just like nailing every pitch. But you can hear that like part of the technique is actually uh, being being conscientious of like what registration to pick. And like that actually makes her able to sing really, really well live. Lots of microphone play as well. But yeah, you're actually fooling people with think more like more resonance than like force and power. I think is with the way what I would talk about this. Like pop singers are more like style magicians and they're doing little turns and little flips and stuff. And that's why sometimes when you're like listening to a song and you're singing it, like as a novice singer, and they're just singing the notes, they sound like kind of wrong. It just doesn't sound right because they're missing all the little tiny details, right? They're missing that, like, oh, that person scooped right there. And then they did that little run that they often did, sometimes don't hear and then like aren't singing that or smoothing it together too much. And then like they're changing their registration. So you might have a song where you're up here like at first and then actually just singing the same note but like with heavier sound for the chorus, right? So it could be like, I don't know if I'm okay, da, da, kind of sing up there, and then like, tell me why you said that day, again just making up random things, and then they're back to, hey, like I don't know, da, 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 whoa, and then kind of going back into that sort of thing. So the contrast is often a big part of it. So if you just play into like being shouty all the time, that's gonna backfire. So find this sort of light thing first. I think again is really helpful, like, especially again if you're used to singing more clean tone all the time, like playing around with vocal fry, playing around with breathiness, and how much you come in and out of it. It's just going to give you that change of style. Because oftentimes, also a pop singer will do something where they kind of sing with one style and then switch it up, like go a little bit rock or add a little bit of grit. And that's part of this, like the shock factor power of pop music. Like it starts kind of chill and like a low register, and then it like pops up the octave and it's like a little more gritty and a little bit more forced. Again, and pop music, we play with these things, and that's why there's a lot more issues with like vocal fatigue and other things, because we're sort of pushing the envelope and experimenting, trying to make lots of contrast. It's true for like rock music as well. Again, rock music was considered pop music for a bit, right? And now it's like, what is it? It's like rock, but like also it just kind of morphs into what we consider pop, as just borrowing from all of these different styles to create an authentic voice for your particular song and whatever you're arranging. So again, like you can make a song poppy by adding in more runs, by making it breathier, by scooping. Another one is purposefully cracking. We talked about this in musical theater. So it also comes from that sort of feeling of being light here, and then purposefully adding in a little laryngeal manipulation, a little bit of like holding into like too bright and then trying to go up into head voice, and that's going to cause a crack. Or the other thing is being too light in head voice and then trying to kind of lean into it will crack you down into chest voice. Again, if it really hurts, you're over holding. So it's lighter is the feeling that you want to do. And what I'd recommend with practicing cracks, which is really fun, is try to aim them to another pitch. So this is something where when you start to realize that you can do this, like, okay, I'm looking at a melody, let's say maybe I'm looking at sheet music or I'm listening to it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to jump from here to here in the melody, but I want to do like a pop flip, right? So I might be like, hey, and then try to aim the crack to that note. Hey, it's not just like cracking randomly. In fact, I think when cracking sounds bad is when it's just not aimed correctly. Or you're like, obviously unintentionally, it's like happening where you're trying to add power into your voice and then it cracks because it kind of misfires. But so let's see if you can practice doing this different pitches. So this is like 1 to 4, but then let's try 1 to 3. And that's like where you're going to practice this aiming. So if I was like 1 to 4 first, like, hey, hey, hey. Sometimes cracking right next to the note can be really hard, actually. So, hey, goodbye, I, night. Right? Sounds it's like again, these sounds isolated, sounds so weird, and people are maybe like, "Okay, you're crazy." But go and listen, and really, you can start to see that like really good pop musicians are making lots of choices like this. It may not be for everybody. Again, that you don't have to add a flip to make yourself sound contemporary. Especially like for a lot of guy singers, maybe you might be like, I'm not going to do that. There are plenty of guy singers who definitely also do cracking, obviously. But maybe it's more common in certain other voice types. Um, yeah, yeah. So it's funny, right? Remember I was talking about like cracking, it can be a vocal tension problem or it can be a stylistic choice. It's not necessarily bad for you. It's just like if your voice is cracking a lot, it can be a sign that it's getting fatigued. It's like your ankle's getting wobbly, right? Like or something like that. You're giving out. It's giving out and it's going to something that's less pressure because the voice can't handle it, and it's too irritating. And so it's like an eject panel, right? So we can purposefully eject ourselves and be like, look, I just did a trick. Or yeah, it's happening all the time because your voice is like in trouble. So it's funny again, like stylistically, these things like really like engaging or squeezing your larynx is like a problem. Your voice is going to be in trouble. It's going to get fatigued really quickly. But when I'm doing a run and I'm like, like ah, ah, hey. Like I might purposefully pulse it in order to get that kind of a sound instead of like ha, 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 right? It's too smooth, right? But ha, yeah, whoa, oh, and I'm learning actually how to like engage and control these muscles a little bit. It's like learning to be like a parkour snowboarder, right? Like you could snowboard with really good technique down at like a really intense hill, or you could just do like parkour tricks and things like that, right? And so again, a pop musician I think of as like doing lots of little tricks, and that's what makes it like accessible and fun. And that's why there's tons of runs and ornamentation, scoops and slides. The cracking is another trick again. So again, the exercise is find a place in your range that's kind of like middle high to where you're gonna maybe you could sing head voice. So I like I can sing head voice there. I can even sing it here. This whole place. But I'm gonna go chest voice. Ah, 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 and try to get that sort of feeling, right? Ah, again, it's a weird focus, but you're actually trying to aim to a particular spot. Um, so you can be like, and play, and, like, or like, goodbye. Yeah. Like maybe I'm like, don't want to say goodbye. Yeah. And like kind of doing something like that. And switching up into a head voice for a moment. Then I might take that same moment, like a pop singer would do this all the time, same range, and be like, don't wanna say goodbye. Don't wanna say goodbye. It could be smooth, could be a flip, and then later on, don't wanna say goodbye. Whoa. And then you have that difference. Again, I made this analogy earlier. So I know some of you are all showing up now. It's like maybe I need to do these a little later. I don't know if all of you are like getting out of work. I'm open to like changing the time too, because I want to make sure everyone doesn't just like, what did you say? And you kind of just jump into this in the middle. But the one of the main things I talked about with pop music, yeah, so voice cracking is a vocal flip. That's really pretty much what it is. It's just controlled or not controlled is kind of the way I would think about it. Again, jargon a little bit. I'm purposefully playing with my voice. So what I was going to say is think of like the difference between like stage acting and film acting. And like, stage acting, you're gonna have big exaggerated motion. It's like a lot of energy actually. And then film acting is more about like careful subtlety, right? Because of the change of technology. So if you think about last week, we talked about musical theater, and I was like, it's about storytelling, it's about character, it's about showing things and articulation. So that's a particular kind of vibe. There's pop music in that, of course, too, but it's to tell a story. If you do that in pop music too much, it's like you're like a soap opera actor all of a sudden, right? Like it just kind of the platform is like a sort of a weird hybrid. There are people who do this. Sometimes it's fun, it's tongue in cheek too. Like I think like for example, like even Lady Gaga, like for example, like she's very theatrical about things that she does. And then sometimes there's even like a little bit of that sound, but then she's also stylizing things. But she's like, making a show, right? Like it's basically like little mini musicals sometimes that she's doing with dance routines and everything. So there's all sorts of hybrid here. But the main thing you want to think about for most pop singing is like we're working in a mic. And so it's more about the subtleties and it's more like film acting. And so your voice actually can be lighter. And so again, people sometimes, if you can't find your light mix, you're going to get really fatigued with pop music because you're going to be trying to push air. So I'll show you like, for example, it's like I don't like demonstrating bad technique too much because it's like I don't want that to happen. But like let's say I'm up here and if I instead of like doing my like na yeah na 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 keeping it really light, but I'm on in my mix and I'm na like that immediately starts hurting my voice because I'm pushing air and it's destabilizing my vocal folds and they're trying to hold themselves together. So it's this different thing. If I'm like and like I'm like, ooh, that person needs to be careful. But if I'm and na 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 na, it's about placement. And it's again all of these little things. Like it's like being a yo-yo artist, so it's really hard to like see what's happening internally. It's like all these little micro changes. It's based on the feeling and ease of production. This is why we have voice teachers. Just a little comment to that person last time who was like, I don't understand. Like, there's all these people who swear by all these techniques, but I don't like. How do I know what like like, can they actually sing like a really famous pop singer and stuff like that? Yeah, we have like copyright issues of demonstrating specific things. But the thing is like a voice teacher, in a lot of ways is like we have a good facility with understanding lots of different voices, and when people are running into problem areas, including like famous singers who run into issues all the time. And so being able to help people find an ease of production is a big part of it. And that's a different skill than particularly being like a performance artist. Often you want a mix of both, is what I was, kind of saying. It's really helpful to have that. But there are plenty of like very, famous professional singers who like don't teach, and they like specialize in a way that they use their voice, but it doesn't necessarily apply to other voices. So it's a careful little balance to be like, I understand maybe what's out of balance in a voice and how to maybe bring it to a better place and guide them stylistically, all of these kinds of things. It's just it's a slightly different practice. And so again, like the main thing you want to pay attention to is like, how does this feel in my voice? If anything, like the awareness of that is most important. There's ways to do things more efficiently. Just like you said, like people's voices crack a lot when they've been singing for a long time. If you're letting your voice crack purposely as part of your style, you're kind of helping create some release to a certain degree too. So there's ways that voices kind of find equilibrium with the kinds of songs that they're singing. So let's say you're exploring a unique style for you and you're getting really fatigued. Like me as a voice teacher, like that person's working on their pop vocals, I'm like, maybe you should explore some other options for stylistic choices so that you don't have to sing so heavy the entire time. You can have like, a moment where you're like, up in this area, like G sharps, I remember used to break me, like as a young singer. And now I can just like sometimes in certain songs, I can be like, I don't know, and be like just up in that sort of area. No, 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 no. Right. I could just sing up there really light. Cause some phrases, like if I was like, like, no, um, no, no is mine way. So like, let's say I'm just coming up with random words, but like, uh, so let's say I'm like, your smile is my way. Like, find my own way, find my own way. Just coming up with a thing there. I can sing that and it literally feels like nothing. I'm like, find my own. I need a little extra breath support. Find my own way. Like that style might be better in certain circumstances than having to sing super heavy. So it's like a matter of like finding endurance. Like what's okay, like if I know I've got a marathon to run, like if I'm doing the same motion the entire time, I'm going to get fatigued with repetitive motion, kind of injury feelings. But if I find a way to sort of sculpt it, maybe the first time, like I'm using more vocal fry and I'm using more breathiness and a light mix, and then I bring in more energy later on and sing it more heavy. If I want to add the sort of grit thing, I'm able to sort of balance those forces out. So again, pop singing is much lighter than people would think. Focus on finding breathy tone without pushing air out, but instead thinking about sort of light mixing, um, thinking about fogging a mirror, so resistance of air, but sort of finding an evenness with that. Vocal fry, scoops and slides. If you even like runs themselves, if you think about them, like there are ways that like instead of sustaining a note, you can release, or you can find a way to move through the voice faster without it getting sort of too static, right? So it's like an agility practice, but it actually can help you from not bearing down too much in certain phrases. So that's why you'll often find runs at like the ends of phrases. People are releasing their voice and resetting, coming into the next thing. And again, like my main focus here is like belting, like really loud, intense, forceful belting is often more of like a musical theater and a rock thing. And I think pop music, yes, does belting, but you want to think of it more from a mix perspective because you've got a mic, you're recording, you can add in all sorts of things to mix the sound when you're actually using like electronics and digital processing and all that kind of stuff. And so it's actually much lighter and it fools people's ears. And so that gives you the ability to have the agility and stylistic manipulation. And anyone who's doing pop music, practice other styles so you can get influence. And then from there, just try to operate your voice in a way that feels authentic, record it back. Um, and that's really going to be the best thing that you can do for pop music, because there's not a right answer. In fact, good pop music singers are and artists are redefining the genre, and sometimes they're bringing back these influences and then making their own spin on it. So again, there's pop classical, there's pop musical theater, and in pop musical theater, there's pop, there's pop rock, like pop, more poppy jazz, pop country, right? You name it, and like you can like add pop in. It's like, oh yeah, because it's also contemporary, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm pushing the envelope and singing in a way that's less expected. So adding lots of runs, changing it up every time, improvising, all of this kind of stuff makes for that. Sometimes adding like really odd sounds. So that's what I'd recommend. And again, like this is a little more esoteric, because I think yes, you can make these into like repeatable exercises, but when you think that way too much, it starts to become too rehearsed. And that's where we also lose a little bit of the pop accessibility kind of a sound. So it really is a careful thing. Some of it just comes through the music that you're working on and thinking about all the tools that you can use. So, like, again, also as a teacher, I'll be like, have you considered using this tool? And like, or, you're singing the notes like too perfectly, like try like maybe scooping into one of them, or like, yeah, add a little turnaround or something, or anything like that. Let yourself crack. Like you can like let yourself crack at the end of a note and be like, and I don't know why. Right. And like that kind of a thing might all of a sudden someone's like, why are you singing that way? It might draw some attention. If you do it all the time, it might be like kind of weird, but there are some singers who do that. So, um, again, I know some of you are all just like showing up now, and I'm always like, I gotta run to my next thing. But hopefully that just gives you some insight. Again, pop music is an ever-changing goalpost, and it's defined by literally just not being like the things that we've heard before. So if pop music is like origins in the 50s, like that doesn't feel like pop music. I'm like, well, pop music sounds like the 90s. And it's like, well, that's because I grew up in the 90s. Um, um, yeah. So like when we have specific vocal exercises, are like finding your tone. So like like there are some on like the 30 Day Singer website and stuff like that, where like there's specific like routine of like how to find your breathy tone, how to find vocal fry with like sort of like more linear exercises through your range. But I really just like encourage you to like experiment and explore, find your mix is kind of like the first thing. And then like you can actually work on riffs and runs in a very formulaic way too. So that's like we'll do that as like another course sometime, where we're just talking about like how to do riffs in particular. But yes, yeah, there are like pop warm ups and stuff like that. But again, I just my caveat, my like sort of warning with this is like if you are like, okay, now I've mastered pop music because I've done this routine. Pretty soon you're gonna be in the past, and you're gonna be it's too rehearsed, and like it's gonna sound like old pop, right? So you're very welcome. And yeah, and again, and I'm like reacting to like, like being able to sing in that tone that I'm already doing, like na na na, yeah. Anything like that is hard for those who like. I studied classical, right? And like, so my first sort of realm is like, oh, and like doing that kind of a thing. And like, it's funny thinking back on it. Like, it was hard for me to like default to the different style for a while, because I was so trained in a certain way that like when I'm nervous, or like when I was just trying to make sure I'm singing well or correctly, I would kind of default to more classical things, because that was kind of my training. So some of pop singing is to like mix it up, play with your voice. It lends itself to sometimes feeling fatigued, various sort of things where you're maybe confused because you're trying out new things. And so breaking certain practices, that's where having a teacher can be helpful, but also just pay attention to how it feels. And remember that it's close mic singing, so you don't have to like over force it. Actually, it's more fine detail work. So um, yeah, yeah, I'll do that at some point. This was a little more like overarching kind of style thing, but we can play around with that. It's just a it's a tricky game. They do exist on the 30 Day Singer stuff, but I'll keep note for it. Like remember like last time I talked about my next sort of cycle is to do just like warm up routines with like no explanation. So it'd be kind of or like very limited. So like thank you. I appreciate it. Like and subscribe. I don't ever say that kind of stuff because it's like, I don't really care so much, but I mainly just want to like keep this community going and continue sort of the thought on like what are we actually doing here, because you'll see a lot of content out there like kind of just trying to get your attention, being commercial about it because it's like an industry, right? As like teaching music, and we wanted to do it as a job and stuff. But I'm mainly just interested in trying to help people understand sort of what's at play, the framework, and yeah, some specific exercises. So yeah, one thing I'm going to do, and maybe I'll put it in the title, but it'll be like pop warm up flow. And I'm not going to like say much. I'm just going to work on some things, and then maybe that'll be kind of exactly what you're looking for. You can kind of try it out with me. So that's the plan. I got to run, but I will catch y'all whenever I see you next. I think we're gonna write a new batch of them soon, so it might be Camille next, but we'll get that all figured out soon. So look forward to it, and I'll catch y'all in a week or two or whenever I see you next. So all right, later, peace.